Welcome back to the Rediscover the 80s podcast and another episode of Rank 'em, the show that counts down your favorites from the 80s. I am your host, Jason Gross, and I'm proud to welcome back to the podcast a guest who I first met through the Underscoop Fire website and was actually a guest. He was a guest on the very first Rediscover the 80s podcast several years ago, which you can still find in the feed. He is now the host of his own show, The Chap Report, which you can find in the Nerd Lunch podcast feed. Welcome, Mr. Corey Chapman.
Hello. It's great to be back, Jason. How are you?
I am doing fine. I'm glad you came along, and I've been trying to find somebody to talk some music on this podcast. So I'm glad that you accepted and that you're here. And we're going to be talking about music around the year 1988.
We'll get into that in a few minutes, I'm sure.
Right.
I want to say thank you very much for having me back on the show. I love the work that you do. I've said it on the Underscoop Fire podcast. I've said it over the years. You are the closest living link to the 1980s. You keep that flame alive. And anytime I drift away into the cold, I can always pull myself back to your flame, your 1980s eternal flame. See what I did there, Jason?
Yes,
there we go.
I did.
Okay.
Yes, see, that's what I appreciate about you. Yes. Well, I do remember you having a specific taste for music, listening to the Underscoop Fire podcast over the years. So I seem to remember you and Joe having like an affinity for like late 80s and early 90s hip hop, and might even say like boy bands.
I think you're sort of confusing us with William Bruce West, who does have a love for the boy bands. Joe and I had a love for one specific boy band. If you rank the boy bands in order of how great they were in the world, number one is always the Beatles. Number two is New Kids on the Block, and that's what we're talking about. That's what we love. And then there's no three, there's no four. Then we skip all the way to like 89, and then it's like NSYNC and Backstreet Boys and stuff. So those are the two upper echelon boy bands of all time. And yes, Joe and I do love New Kids.
Well, let's see how much you really love them as we are counting down 1988 tonight, and we sort of try to do these shows around albums or movies or TV shows released during a specific year. But I kind of made the mistake of sending Corey a list of basically the Hot 100 or maybe even 200 of 1988, which actually was some albums that were released in 87. So I think we're just going to throw the format out the window, and we'll, these songs and these albums were around this time. And we'll just kind of go with what we got tonight, regardless of when they were released. How about that?
I would say this, Jason, and that's fair, because I did tell you in advance that some of the albums that caught my eye looking at a list you provided me, I started starting to listen to some of that old music again, and I felt like it was in 1988. I didn't feel like it was in 87. I didn't feel like it was in 89. I felt like it was in 1988. So we can go through this in a little bit, but we also did mention though, and this is for the listeners, that maybe the album was not released between January 1st and December 31st, 1988. But a lot of the singles, a lot of the music that was getting airplay off these albums were in fact your spring and summer of 88 hits. So I think we've got a little room to play around with that 1988 number. Okay.
Yeah. I'm with you on that. Okay. Well, let's, before we get into our top 5 list, I'm going to do a quick little context like I've been doing on these Rank 'em shows. And let's just give the listener a little temperature of 1988 and the top albums of that year. Number 10 was Aerosmith's Permanent Vacation, which I adored. I'm a big Aerosmith fan. Number 9 was Tiffany's self-titled album.
Boo.
Make you want to head to the mall?
Well, no, in 1988, it was like Pepsi versus Coke. It was the Beatles versus the Stones. It was Debbie Gibson or Tiffany. You couldn't be fans of both. And I, as we'll talk in a minute, was a fan of the other. Continue. Go ahead.
Gotcha. Okay. Number 8, Richard Marx self-titled album. And Mr. Marx, I do believe he was actually the first concert I ever went to.
Oh, wow. Okay.
My mom took me.
That's okay.
So that's my excuse, at least, for going to see Richard Marx. But anyway, that was at the local county fair. Just
you were 12. Who are you supposed to go? Like a date?
I don't know. I just don't see. I've never had any like Richard Marx albums. So, okay, Mom, I'll tag along.
Yeah. You'll tag along. Right. You didn't think of it like as, Mom, this is going to be my first concert, and years from now, when I do a podcast, I'm going to have to tell the world this was my first concert.
Right.
Let's go, Mom. Okay.
All right, number 7, as we were just talking about, Debbie Gibson, Out of the Blue. She finished a little higher, a
little better.
Number 6 was Guns N' Roses, Appetite for Destruction, which I know that one came out in 87. So that was a big carryover into the next year, as well as Michael Jackson's Bad, which was number 5. Number 4, In Excess, Kick. I remember having that cassette very well. Number 3, Def Leppard's Hysteria. Number 2 was the Dirty Dancing soundtrack. And then number 1, George Michael with Faith, which was a huge, there's several number 1s on that album.
4.
Thank you.
You're welcome. You don't think I will be talking about that album shortly. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, that was the top 10 for 1988. And then just a few kind of awards and events that were going on that year. January 20th, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame ceremony inducts the Beach Boys, the Beatles, the Drifters, Bob Dylan, and the Supremes. So that was a pretty stout class. That would seem like it was it should have been a lot earlier, but I don't know my Rock and Roll Hall of Fame history, and that why, what is it, 20 years you have to wait since your first or your last album, or I don't know. Anyway,
it's some weird rule. I think they were probably just trying to get caught up at that point, and now now they're finally like, all right, we got anybody left to induct at this point?
I know. I know, right?
Is level 42 around? Can we get those guys to come to Cleveland? No? Okay.
I think I found MC Hammer. He's still selling albums there in Oakland.
That's right.
Out of the trunk of his car. April 19th, former rock and roll singer Sonny Bono is inaugurated as the mayor of Palm Springs.
Excellent.
That was 1988. August 12th, Public Enemy garners some publicity by staging a concert at Rikers Island Prison for 250 inmates and 100 journalists.
Okay.
Yeah, I did not remember that, but I thought that was interesting. And then on December 4th, singer Roy Orbison, he gave his last concert in Akron, Ohio, just before his death from a heart attack. So that was the year that he passed away.
He was fairly young, wasn't he? He was like in his mid to late 50s.
That sounds correct.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was pretty sudden.
Mm-hmm.
It kind of reminds me of not necessarily the way that he passed away, but with Tom Petty, just he was on tour and then he's gone.
I see you putting that traveling Willsbury. Was it Willsbury?
Traveling Wilbury.
Wilbury. Boy, I'm having a tough time tonight myself.
And then one quick one. I heard it through the grapevine, experiences a surge in popularity in the U.S., sparked by the television commercials featuring those claymation figures, the California Raisins.
Oh, God.
And that song actually went back on the charts, their version, the Raisins version, and actually charted at number 84 on the Hot 100 chart.
Nice.
So yeah, that was a big year for the Raisins. And then we will run through the Grammys really quick. Now, these are the 89 Grammys, which basically were the 88 music releases. So album of the year. I'm sorry?
Oh, no, I said go. Yes, correct. Go ahead.
I thought you said wait. Album of the year was George Michael's Faith. Song of the year, Bobby McFerrin's Don't Worry, Be Happy. Wow, I didn't realize that was Song of the Year. New Artist of the Year, which is, essentially the Kiss of Death. That's Tracy Chapman.
Oh, Aunt Trace.
And then for the first time, we had Best Rap Performance. And that was taken by DJ Jazzy Jeff and the Fresh Prince. Parents Just Don't Understand.
Fantastic.
So that's a quick little glimpse at 1988 music, we'll call it. So just a reminder about the ground rules for Rank 'em. These are essentially our lists. We're not trying to, throw in there something, this artist was number one and had 5 number ones, so I got to put them at number. We're just kind of trying to pick our favorites and kind of roll with that. So with that being said, let me have your number 5 choice, sir.
Okay, number 5. Coming in at number 5 for me is Don't Be Cruel, Bobby Brown.
Nice.
It had a multitude of hits off of that album, including Don't Be Cruel, My Prerogative, Roni, Rock With You. But my favorite, the one that got me going, the one that got me putting that cassette in was Every Little Step. And the crossover, for the most part, that album, outside of My Prerogative and Every Little Step, was really R&B. And the videos and the songs for My Prerogative and Every Little Step kind of made that crossover for Bobby Brown more mainstream, which obviously helped him along the way for future albums. So that's one that, one of the rules I have playing this kind of game is, can I go back, listen to the entire album and enjoy it? And that's absolutely the case for Bobby Brown's Don't Be Cruel.
Absolutely. I will give you my thoughts on Don't Be Cruel, but you're going to have to wait a little bit more in this podcast.
Fair enough.
So that's we'll leave it at that. But yes, excellent choice. I do remember that vividly. I do remember trying to record My Prerogative off of the radio. I love that song so much.
Yeah.
If you remember those days. So great choice at number 5. My number 5, I don't know. This was tough for me, like 5, what would be 5, 6, and 7. They were all real neck and neck. But for number 5, I went with Living Colour's Vivid.
Okay.
Of course, the main track off of there that really got some airplay, Cult of Personality. Oh my gosh. That was just one you can just crank in the car. You can crank anywhere really, but it just, for me, even that band just kind of blew any kind of stereotype I had about metal, rock and roll, whatever, out of the window. Because you're watching the video. I mean, there's all those little great cuts from speeches and, everything that they've got in there. And then, just a killer song, killer guitar work on there. And then I just love, I remember having the cassette, and that was the first track on the cassette. And then there's a couple more tracks I would listen to, and then I'd flip it over, and they actually have a theme song, Living Color.
Oh, wow. Okay.
What's Your Favorite Color is the name of the song. And it's another one of those kind of really upbeat rocking songs on the other side of the album. So I remember actually not getting through the entire album and flipping it over and hitting that song and Glamour Boys, which I remember the video and had some airplay on MTV on that one too. So, but just Cult of Personality was so big for me. Really loved that song. And that's mainly why I kind of got it in there. But what did you listen to Living Color at all?
Only that song, and I thought it was. I don't know if I can say this on the podcast if it's allowed. It was Kick Ass. I don't know if that's
That's
too
fine. Go ahead.
All right, cool. It was it was an awesome song. It is stood the test of time as well. When that first guitar lick comes in, even in 2018, you know what you're getting. And if you lived in the 80s, you know the riffs to it, you know the hook to it. Absolutely love that. Did I get anywhere ast that on the album? No, not a chance.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Yeah. Okay, well let's roll on to your number 4 pick.
Okay, so this is where it really gets murky because I have my 4 albums listed right here in front of me. I could go any which way. This is almost like a 1A, 1B, 1C, 1D, and then 5. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mix it up a little bit. And when I first started this process, it was, what do they call it? Chalk, when you pick the number 1 album of the year as your favorite album. You can't do that, right? You can't pick the number 1 seed in the tournament to win the championship. So I will put Faith in at number 4 for me. Again, released in 87, but it had hits in 87 and 88 so strong that it was the number 1 selling album of 1988. To speak to this album, if I could for a minute, obviously that's why you have me on the show. There are a bunch of hits on this. There are 4 number 1 US pop hits. There's a number 2. My favorite song on this album, and this is semi-embarrassing. I don't mind telling you or your audience, but when Monkey came out, which was I think the last single released off the album, it was early summer of 88. It's a black and white video for those who don't recall. And his fashion sense at that time, because he was always pushing a little bit, you know, the leather jacket and the tight jeans and, you know, whatever, was at this point, he was wearing suspenders, a white shirt, and then he had, it's pork pie hat, right? It's one of those flat hats. You remember this, right?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So my birthday is in August every year. That's when I'm born. What did I ask for my birthday that year? That outfit. That outfit. I'm not joking. This is true. 1988. I'm turning 12 years old, and I can't imagine what my parents thought. Like, wait, you want the video would come on and go, I want that exact thing, because I love that song so much. Now, I never got any of that. I think I got suspenders, but I didn't get the rest of the outfit. But anyway, so when that song comes on, and in this day and age, quite frankly, to hear that on any kind of radio, it's typically, if I'm listening to Sirius and they're doing a countdown from 88, that's when you're going to hear it, right? They don't just put it in rotation. But that brings me back to when I was young. The other kickers on that album were Faith, for sure. How he did what he did, he got that groove going in 2.5, 3 minutes. Father Figure, again, I'm 12. Why am I enjoying that song so much? He came back with One More Try, another kind of love ballad, like on this album that's kind of schizophrenic. It's all over the place. And then the one that I wasn't allowed to listen to unless nobody was around and I was watching MTV real quietly, you know, under the covers. That doesn't sound right. Was I Want Your Sex, right?
Right,
so
yeah.
That album, and again, I don't mean to be too enthusiastic about this, coming off a perception in Wham where they were kind of just light, poppy, just kind of, you know, background music. We're going to have a couple of pop singles. To this, to me, was huge. It was a big change. It really established George Michael as this dominant solo artist. And it's an album, again, like going back to Don't Be Cruel, I can put that on anytime and be taken back to when I was a little bit younger. So George Michael, Faith, we'll call it 4 on my list.
Okay. Well, yeah, I mean, it's an obvious pick for anybody that remembers at least, you know, American Top 40 during that era, because, you know, he was there with multiple singles and over probably a year and a half with that album.
Yeah.
Just being on the radio. But yeah, it's one that I never owned. But obviously
Okay.
I basically know his singles more than I'm a fan of like George Michael or Wham.
Okay.
I do remember, I could be wrong about this, but it sticks in my mind that I was listening to, it was either Casey Kasem or Rick Dees, one of those top 40 shows, and PM Dawn sampled Father Figure for one of their tracks.
Okay.
Patient Eyes, I want to say.
Okay.
And it went either to number one or was close to number one. It seemed like it was number one because it was like the first song to sample a number one song to hit number one. Does that make sense?
It does. Yeah, absolutely.
It was something weird, but it just stuck in my brain. I remember listening to the Countdown show, whichever one it was, and them announcing that and being like, oh, that's weird. And that was just about the time when I, really got into, okay, this is a sample of this song. And my I don't know, memories of music or what I could remember, I'm like, oh, okay, I've heard this song before, and he's stole it from this person, whatever.
Right.
But yeah, that sticks out in my mind as far as George Michael and that album. But yeah, I mean, oh my gosh, those songs they just wore them out on the radio. And it's, he's, I think, maybe the second or third person behind Michael Jackson for number ones all time. So he's got a huge following and still does.
And you say they were worn out on the radio, and I agree with you in that time period. But when I hear one of those songs on the radio today, it's crisp, it's fresh. To me, it's timeless, and it's not like, oh God, we're hearing this one again. There are some songs from that. Yeah, there's some songs from that era that we hear and we go, oh God, we've heard this a million times, and yes, I get it. Okay, it represented 82, like Mickey or things like that. But those songs from that Faith album, just they don't lose a generation to me, and I think that's a part of it. So yeah.
Yeah, very true. And I'll hear Faith on the radio, but you don't hear Monkey, you don't hear One More Try, you don't hear I Want Your Sex. You hear Faith mainly from this album,
of course.
And now, in today's era, but yeah, if you happen to hear one of those other songs or just, put on the album, I can see that. I can see how it would be oh yeah, this was a great song, and you just kind of remember. You're right back there. Okay, well, we'll leave it at that, and then I'll go on to my number 4, which was an album I really didn't pick up until what I would call the Columbia House BMG era for me.
12 for a penny?
Right. I happened to grab this one and just kind of fell in love with it in the earlier 90s. So I didn't catch it for maybe about another 4 or 5 years. And that was Steve Winwood's Roll With It.
Okay.
Now, of course, the title track is one that pretty much everyone knows. And I don't know, I think Steve Winwood I could kind of group him in with a few other artists, maybe Tom Petty, that has just that unique voice that you either love it or you hate it.
Right.
And I excuse me, I loved it. And the album, there's several tracks on the album that it just, I call him the king of the 5-minute song, because all of his songs, there's no short ones on any of his albums, it seems like. But there were several great songs, and you're just gonna get hooked into a song, and it'll just kind of take you through that album. And Roll With It, Holding On. There's a track called The Morning Side, which oh my gosh, it's almost like you could replace Steve with Phil Collins on this album.
Okay.
And it would fit seamlessly, because just the way he works the drums, and there is some great like kind of driving. That Morningside song is just really awesome, and it kicks in with the drums like Phil does on Phil, like I know him, like he does on several of his albums. It's got that unique, real crisp drum sound, and then a lot of keyboard. If you've never listened to it, it's a really great album. It's got Don't You Know What the Night Can Do? You know, the makes you want to pick up a Michelob, you know.
Sit on a dock on a nice summer's evening and listen to that, right?
Right, yeah. Hang around at a table at a downtown, you know, bar with your Michelob in your hand. And anyway, it's just an album that really grew on me, and not one that I was expecting to really, you know, like the entire album other than the singles that were released. But really love that album. The song Holding On, you know, songs take you back to a certain moment in time. And that song, I'm working at the radio station, WCPA and WQIX, which was in Clearfield, Pennsylvania.
Okay.
And I got a little on Saturdays before the Penn State football games. If I was doing a Saturday shift, there was a time when we would do about 15 minutes of news from 12 to 12:15, and then from the rest of that hour up until 1 when the game started, I essentially could be a DJ, and I was actually spinning records.
Oh, nice.
So it was the best 45 minutes, you know, of my week if working at the radio station. And I got to open up the mic. I wasn't really doing DJ work, but it was more just little news and weather,
right?
In between songs. But that was one of the ones on record that I would go to and pretty much play every week. So people, you know, tuning into Penn State, oh my gosh, he's playing Steve Winwood again. But it just takes me back to that moment and spinning that song. But anyway, what is your thoughts on Steve Winwood? Have you listened to that album at all?
You know, I would have back in the day. I didn't own it. All the songs that you mentioned, I do recall them. Was Hearts on Fire on that album too?
Yes.
Okay.
It was.
Okay. Yeah, because he had a bunch in the early to mid '80s that to me blended together. So singles wise anyway, obviously the standout is for me anyway, Don't You Know What the Night Can Do. I always liked Steve Winwood, but again, you're right, there's a camp of people that like him, and there's folks that just anytime he comes on you turn it right off. So
right.
So I couldn't tell you that, like, I wouldn't sit down and listen to this album back in '88 or even later, but your description of it makes me want to try to find the rest of these tracks and give it a shot 30 years afterwards.
Yeah,
so.
even if it's just like the first half of the album. Oh,
yeah,
it's so good. It's one that I would remember around high school, just putting in my Walkman or Discman, I guess at the time, and cranking up in the headphones and just going to sleep or something to it. But it was great.
That's awesome.
Okay, go ahead with your number 3 pick, sir.
Okay, number 3, we are going to go again with an album that was released in '87. Some of the hits were in '87, some were in '88, but again, it rocked the top of the charts in '88, and that's all that matters to me. One of the first woman I had a crush on, and that is Miss Deborah Gibson, better known back then as Debbie Gibson. The album is Out of the Blue. And, you know, I like different kinds of music. I liked R&B. I liked rock. I liked, you know, some general pop music. But when this album came out, I immediately purchased it on cassette, of course, with my, paper route money or whatever it was. I listened to the entire thing. I loved the entire thing and immediately questioned my sexuality for 3 days. And I went, should I really, really, really like this album as much as I do as a straight male 11, 12-year-old guy? And, no worries. This has nothing to do with if it's good or bad to be, but I was so into Only in My Dreams, Shake Your Love, Out of the Blue, right? These are like, just kind of pop, 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 but, bouncing around. I'm dancing around. And then when Foolish Beat comes out, it's a little emotional, right? Like now you're starting to, that's the time where you're starting to get into the girl guy stuff where you're starting to like girls, but you don't know why. And then a song will play like Foolish Beat. And you're like, why am I emotional right now? What is wrong? I don't understand. So Again, straight male, wife, 3 children. But at the time I was like, maybe I'm not, because I love this album so much. But I do love Debbie Gibson. I followed that up with Electric Youth. So if you ever do an 89 rewind, get with me. We will talk Electric Youth. I proudly own both of these albums. And to this day, my wife was always team Tiffany. I always team Debbie Gibson. So, and here's what I fall back on to this day. Debbie wrote all of her music. I think she was one of the youngest female hit #1 song, youngest writer, something like that. And so, go ahead and cover Tommy James and the Shondells and the Beatles all day, Tiffany. We got a singer songwriter in my camp. So Debbie Gibson out of the
Very good. Very good. Yes. My buddy Wyatt would definitely be not ashamed to tell you, Tiffany, Debbie Gibson, Martika, even early Mariah Carey. Oh, he had them all, man.
Martika with the one song. Just by the single.
But yeah, it definitely was not my cup of tea, we'll say.
Right.
Even just looking at my list, I'm like, wow, I've got some rock and R&B in there. I'm rap and then you got like Steve Winwood, which is, I don't know, somewhere in there. So it's my musical taste back then was just kind of all over the board. And it's just, I think, a testament to that era, even going back further, maybe even to the like late 70s or early 90s, at how diverse the styles of music were in pop music.
I mean, that's perfectly said. That is perfectly said. Again, we are about the same age. We grew up in the 80s. And when you put on pop radio, you got everything. You got a sample platter of everything. And I think what happened was, and we can save this for another show, another day, but I think as I don't want to blame it on, the changing of the industry, but it then became, well, you got to get an alternative radio station because that music is starting to build up and we can't blend it in. So then stations were changing their format for niches alone. And then you were only getting that if you had one station on.
Right.
So that's why the old pop stations of the 80s are the best, because the best music would be played on it. And you would hear a Def Leppard, and then you would hear a Debbie Gibson, and then you would hear a Roy Orbison song, and you'd go, geez, I'm getting all of this and I like it all. So I didn't mean to cut you off, but you said
no. And that's just kind of getting to why I'm not going to trash you for listening to Debbie Gibson back then.
You better not,
because I didn't. But
I'll fight you.
Yeah, but that's just the era that we kind of grew up in, and I miss it. But all right, we're just going to move right along here. Number 3 for me, Bobby Brown's "Don't Be Cruel."
Oh, there it is.
Yes. See, now this 1988 was a year I remember pretty vividly. I'm playing Little League Baseball, and my coach, who was a very large African-American man, introduced me to a couple albums that I got on my countdown here. This is one of them. And I remember his brother was the high school baseball coach, and they had this indoor facility above the local pizza place in my town. And I remember one rainy day we went in there. It's like the only time I think we were in there, maybe once or twice. And we're in the cages, taking batting practice and throwing baseballs around. And he put on "Don't Be Cruel," and we all were just, jamming out to it. Oh, it's just such a great album. And like you said, it from, what we would call from front to back, side A, side B,
side to side.
It was just, there's so many great songs throughout that album. And like I said, My Prerogative, that hit me pretty hard. That's one of the first videos I remember the singer having one of those, like, having one of those microphones. The drive-through microphone. And
can I take your order, please?
it it more or less looked like he was ready to go like fly a helicopter or something back then. It was just so large, but that video was very impactful. And then, like you were talking about with Every Little Step, you know, that white background with the huge white letters, Every Little Step. And he's, if I could ever like have a wish to dance like some famous person, it would probably be Bobby Brown in that video. Because oh my sure. Gosh, they just cut a rug in there. And I
got tired watching him dance in that video.
right. And you know, he was just so cool. You know, he's singing to the girl as she's on one side of those huge letters, you know, and he's singing to her from the other side. And then, you know, he had the backup dancers, but of course Bobby had Bobby on the sleeve, you know, and Bobby on the side of the spandex shorts that he was wearing at the time. So, you know, Bobby was just the coolest thing. And then, yeah, some of the slower songs on there, you know, Rock With You. I still hear those. I get I get the local R&B station at work because my crew, that's the station they want to listen to. So I still hear Rock With You. I still hear Roni. Once in a while, I'll hear Every Little Step, but they'll play those three, I would say, on a weekly basis at least. So I'm still hearing those songs today. I'm like, oh yeah, I mean, this is great. And then I don't know, just listen to that station. I actually did a Google search on Tenderoni, the word, because I'm hearing it. You know, that was the song that pretty much made it popular,
right?
But Michael Jackson used it on PYT.
Yep.
You know, back on the Thriller album, and I hear Bruno Mars still using it. So I'm like, I need to do like this dissertation on the word Tenderoni.
Yeah, that sounds like
figure out where it came up with.
Underscoop Fire blog post coming up for Jason
right. Yeah.
The full definition of Tenderoni.
The things that come in my brain. But anyway, oh gosh, I just love that song. And then this just kind of led right into on our own, the Ghostbusters theme. You know, just that next year. Two.
All right. Yes. Okay.
The next year. So that was just kind of I don't know. I think of that era. I think of Bobby Brown. I think of this album and leading into the Ghostbusters 2 the song. And I just watched the music video last night. I didn't realize there were so many cameos in that as well.
Yes.
You know, it's
weird
like they're
ones too.
Oh yeah. Total random stuff.
Yeah. John Candy is in that, correct?
He was in the original Ghostbusters music video. Now this one has like,
which one is? I'm trying to think of.
2 had, well, you open up and there's Rick Moranis like reading a newspaper or something, and it blows out of his hand.
Yeah.
And then from there on, it's just like random. They had who was the model that was in Michael Jackson's Remember the Time that played the Queen?
Iman?
Yes, she's in that.
Okay, yeah.
And there were some other models, and
I'll have to go back because I that's a song that I enjoy. I've seen the video a million times, of course, but it's been a few years. And that
it's
always a rap that I like to do when you know, too hot to handle, too cold to hold. Yeah, so I will do that every so often, but. And of course, he did cameo. He did cameo in the second movie as well. You know that, right?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Asking for the proton pack.
Yeah. My kid brother wants those proton packs, man.
Yeah. So that's and by the way, Rock With You on many mixtapes in the late 80s, early 90s. You were laying that down for any girl that you like. You were putting that on a tape.
Absolutely.
For the girls.
Absolutely.
So, awesome.
All right. Let's move along. Number 2 for you.
All right. So number 2 for me is, so I had a couple of options here, right? So I could have went with really what I had at number 1 or what I think people think I should have at number 1. I'm going to go with what people think I should have at number 1, and I'm going to put it at my number 2 spot. And that is an 88 release. It is New Kids on the Block. It is the album that spawned the singles Please Don't Go Girl, You Got It, The Right Stuff, I'll Be Loving You Forever, Cover Girl, which by the way was released on my 13th birthday, and the title track, Hangin' Tough. And let me, I don't know if I've ever told you this story, Jason. You had mentioned your very first concert, and it was Richard Marx. And I think I told this on an Underscoop Fire podcast years ago. So I'm going to tell your audience the story. So I grew up when I was younger. I grew up in Toronto, Ontario. And the big theme park north of Toronto is called Canada's Wonderland. And I would go once or twice every year. It had a lot of great thrill rides. It had a amphitheater built into it called, I think at the time, I think it was Kingswood Amphitheater. And my next door neighbor buddy, who was a year younger than I, he and his sister, who was a year older than I, were going to Canada's Wonderland this one summer day. And he invited me to go. And I said, sure, I'll go. Yeah. So I didn't know they picked out that day on purpose because his sister was going to the New Kids on the Block concert. And it was summer of '88, I believe. And so I didn't care. I had nothing to do with that. We didn't have tickets or whatever. So we go and we get there, and the entire theme park is nothing but 12 to 18-year-old girls. I mean, you're really in heaven because we're like two of the 18 boys in this whole park. And I'm going, David, what is going on here? This is what, because New Kids on the Block are here tonight. I'm like, oh, okay. So as the sun went down, most of those girls made their way to this concert, of course, with tickets. We have done all the rides for the day. We have done them a few times. We're kind of getting bored. I don't really know a lot about New Kids at this point. I think my sister likes them. I've heard them a little kind of in the background. And Kingswood is built into the theme park, and they just have these like steel fencing, right? And it's probably about an hour into the concert. We're just hearing like girls screaming, and it's like a Beatles concert from 20 years earlier. And I said, David, let's see if we can get in, right? At that point, nobody was doing anything. We hopped the fence. We jumped. We were on the inside of this concert. We didn't have seats. We just kind of walked up and down aisles. But that was really the first time that I understood the boy band phenomenon. Gotcha. And because these girls were in a trance, enjoying this music. And ultimately, like I said, it was my first concert, and I ended up starting to dig the album a little bit later. Again, same thing with Debbie Gibson going, should I be liking this? But I did, and I didn't mind that. And if you ever do a 1993 episode, you get Joe and myself on that one because we have a very unhealthy love for their NKOTB album, Face the Music. So I am going to put New Kids on the Block, Hangin' Tough in there at number 2.
Okay.
All right, you're up.
Yeah. I won't really go into anything about them because I really have nothing to say.
Okay, really. Leave it at that. Don't offend.
We'll leave it at that. I can stomach Hangin' Tough.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Thank you so much.
All right. Number 2. Such a great album. And again, I went from R&B, rap to rock and roll, heavy metal. So these guys fit right in there. And again, going back to what I was talking about before with my Little League baseball coach, who was a very large African-American man, hearing him pump Bon Jovi's New Jersey through his Chevy Blazer blew my mind. And blew all of the stereotypes, out the window. Oh my gosh. This album, it's one that, like I said, it just kind of shaped my view of the hard rock scene and how just a few songs can just even make the top 40. That are really rocking. I mean, you crank out Bad Medicine, you crank out oh my gosh. I'm gonna
you can't
have to much. no, but like Lay Your Hands on Me. That's what I was trying to think of. Yeah. The first track, it fades in, and it's just got that chant almost at the beginning. and just wails. And I can remember him, doing this like steering wheel air guitar, taking me to practice or taking me to and from places. Oh my gosh, it was just so, I don't know, it just made a measure on my brain
Does
for
that
the
man,
time.
does that man know what kind of musical influence he is in your life?
He does. I actually,
Okay,
I saw him a few years ago, and he, I ran into some random place while I was visiting my parents, and I was like, listening, riding around with you, listening to Bon Jovi, listening to Bobby Brown. I'm trying to think of some other stuff that he had. It was just so impactful on me, and so
awesome.
he knows. He knows.
Good.
It's probably my favorite. I would say like ballad by Bon Jovi is on there. I'll Be There for You.
Sure.
Oh my gosh, I just love that song, and it's such a play. I guess my favorite Bon Jovi tracks, at least the ballads, are the ones where you can really hear Richie Sambora back up John on the vocals, and that's one where they kind of play off each other. And there's certain parts where Sambora comes in, and you get that awesome harmony. And oh man, I just love that song. So, and there's several other ones on there that just didn't hit the airwaves that are really rocking that I love. So it's just one of those albums I can just put on, go work out, or in your instance, go for a run.
Oh yeah.
And just listen from, front to back.
That's awesome.
Really love that album.
That is awesome. Okay. All right. So you very eclectic bunch of albums so far, your top 4. And something in my, I was going to say something in my heart was thinking that we were going to have the same number 1 album, but then I realized that this particular album actually spawns 3 years. So it's actually released in October of 87, but the singles are released all the way into March of 89.
Yeah.
And it's an album that when I first got, again, listened to front to back, and then it was fun hearing, and I don't know if you ever did this when you were a kid, if you ever bought an album for one song, right? Before the CD maxi single and all that kind of stuff. So you hear the first song that is dropped or released, whatever you want to call it. And when you buy the album and you listen to that song over and over again, but then you listen to the whole album and you go, okay, they're going to release that one. And they're going to release that. And you kind of figure that out.
Right.
I remember doing that like in 85 with Janet Jackson. I think I did it in 80. I think I did it with Bad and a few other albums. But this is an album that I looked and I said, if they don't have 4 or 5, if they don't release these 4 or 5 songs, I'm going to be pissed. And I'm going to write, I'm going to write the record label and go, why didn't you release this one? And I know I'm taking a long time to get to it, but it is In Excess, Kick.
Oh yes.
The story that will always be closest to my heart as growing up is the first time I slow danced with a girl was to Never Tear Us Apart. And
oh my God,
you don't need the details, but the way it worked was I wasted the whole night, fast songs, slow songs, whatever. I just, there was this girl, I wanted to dance with her, and having this album for a while, that beginning of that song came on, and it's not a long song that came on. And I just said, geez, all I need is 3. I got 3 minutes. Let's do this. And I went up to her and we danced. It was wonderful. And we didn't date or anything after that. But so every time I hear that, and sometimes I just go to YouTube and play it myself, I remember that first slow dance that I had. But you've got Need You Tonight, Mediate, right? Devil Inside. You got Never Tear Us Apart. You got Mystify. But then like the kicker, like with New Sensation, kind of Guns in the Sky, those songs, I said at the beginning of this podcast, they just pop. They still are alive when you hear them. They're fresh and new. They could be released today and still be hits. And that is that says something about the production of that album, that you could pick that up at 1988, maybe drop it into the 2000s, and we're in a different world with iTunes and singles, but you could release New Sensation and people will be like, oh, I want to hear that again. I'm going to call the radio station. That's a catchy tune. So that is my number one album for that 88 quote era.
I will back you up definitely on this one, because I do remember having the cassette. I couldn't wait for Guns in the Sky to be over with so I could get to New Sensation on that album, because New Sensation was just like, oh my gosh, I love the music video. It had that kind of neon, and it was like,
and it was kind of delayed, and and they were doing the pop.
Oh, I loved it. And just the drum work on that, I would air drum to that, because there's a huge kind of boom boom bass drum throughout that song,
and then it just kind of stops.
Yes.
Dun, 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 dun.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So you know what you're going to do tonight, Jason? When we are done, you are going to go play that tune.
I am. I will.
I think I will too.
And that whole first side is just great. I think it ends with Need You Tonight and Mediate. And then you flip it over, and then you get the rest and get to Never Tear Us Apart. But it always pissed me off to no end when they chop Need You Tonight and Mediate on the radio, and they don't, you don't get the full whatever it is 5 minutes of that. You just get the Need You Tonight. And because I just love Mediate, and the watching the music video where they're just flipping the cards too.
Bob Dylan.
I ended up analyzing that one time just for the fun of it, and trying to come up with just weird statistics about it. How many cards are each person throwing, and just, I don't know. I got sucked into that, but, I just love the continuation of that. And then, I mean, Never Tear Us Apart, such a great riff with the strings and the saxophone, and we need more saxophones in the albums, man. Oh my gosh. Because it's great to have a nice guitar solo, and everybody wants the that great solo with the lead guitarist, but there's you go back to the 80s and you listen to some of the great songs. There's a lot of them have saxophone as the bridge, and I just missed that. So anyway, great pick.
All right, what's your number one?
Number one. All right, I'm gonna have to do this.
Okay.
In the beginning, there were many. As time went on, there became few. Now there's only one. One man, one DJ, standing alone on Mount Olympus. Ladies and gentlemen, DJ Jazzy Jeff. Okay.
Oh, wow. You could have given me 10 choices. I would not have guessed that at all.
He's the DJ. I'm the rapper.
Nice.
Oh my gosh. I love that album. Me and my buddy Wyatt wore it out. It got to the point where I remember an incident where we went to a little small Christian school, and we're rehearsing for some kind of program. Okay. And this is in the sanctuary of our church. And in the speakers, I hear DJ Jazzy Jeff. I'm like, what's going on? My buddy Wyatt is up in the sound booth cranking it and didn't realize it was somehow coming through the speakers. Oh my goodness. I'll never forget that moment. But we loved that album so much, and we had to play it, anywhere we were going at any time.
Yeah.
And it's there's so many tracks on here. Obviously there's the singles. Parents Just Don't Understand. Oh gosh, I love that video.
Yep.
Nightmare on My Street. That was a fun one.
Yeah.
And I don't know if there's any others that were technically released on the album, but there's so many of that I just really love. There's a whole track where they're live, and it's a couple years earlier. I think Fresh Prince even says he's like 16 or 17 years old or something. And they're just playing to the crowd. I think I learned all of the technical terms for all the scratches and the
yeah
and all of that just listening to this album. Break it down for me, Jeff. Break it down. And
I was gonna say there's something to be said though about that, not that album, but the music videos that they put out as well, right?
Oh, yeah.
So we're getting rock videos and we're getting R&B videos and pop, and that's all fine, and it's following formats. It's ladies sliding up and down on cars and live concert things. But then for kids our age, we're tuning in and seeing like little comedy skits to rap.
Right.
And so for me anyway, that was part of the appeal. Half the time I didn't know what they were even saying, but I'm like, this is hilarious. Uh-oh. And then like, here comes mom around, with the funny wig on and
right.
So yeah, there's definitely something to the evolution, even of the music video at that point, that you were like, and did you see DJ Jazzy Jeff's Fresh Prince's new video? It's hilarious. So, but yeah, definitely. I can't believe that's your number one though. That's
it is, man. It is. There's just so much through that. There's a Ready Rock C. He's their beatbox guy on the album, and there's a couple of tracks with him, My Buddy, and then there's one where he does like the Donkey Kong theme.
Okay, yeah.
Oh, it's so great. It's so great. And then that one that I recited was from Rhythm Tracks House Party Style, and there's just so many different beats and throughout the whole album. It's just it's not like you get a consistent, you would like with a rock album or something, but it's all over the place, and every single one of them I just love. So we listened to that album nonstop, probably since it came out through we graduated high school.
Nice.
Just love that album. So I went through it last night. I was actually watching Jazzy Jeff, some live performances of him just from a few years ago. He's still scratching, and there's a Graham Norton video where
I was just going to say Graham Norton.
Yes.
Yeah.
He brought Jazzy Jeff out again. He even brought Carlton on, and they did the Carlton dance, and
that's awesome.
Oh, Alfonso. Yeah, it was great. So anyway, that's my number one. Did you have any honorable mentions you want to throw out there?
No, I had an Ironclad 5. I didn't want to. Well, when I originally looked at the Hot 100, the 100 albums from '88, mentioned in the top 5 was the Dirty Dancing album, and that one I couldn't include just because of the movie side of me. It was an '87 film. How dare I try to jam that in? But that's really a great album as well, and that's a mix of some of the contemporary music at the time versus some of that early '60s. And if there, I should really put together a playlist or just a list, publish a list of songs that if I'm in the car by myself, I will put the windows down and I will sing it out loud. And Hungry Eyes is my jam off of that album.
Eric Carmen.
I may actually be singing that when we are finished because I got to play that one. And you had Swayze with the hit, which I was kind of a little. You had obviously Bill Medley and Jennifer Warnes' big hit, but because it was such a nice blend of contemporary stuff and old stuff, it's an album that holds up today.
Oh yeah.
What about you?
I would do She's Like the Wind instead of Eric Carmen there if I'm doing the windshield karaoke, as I like to say. I will wail on that one. Just a few for me. Just the one I was kind of flip-flopping with Living Color was Run DMC's Tougher Than Leather.
Okay.
Love me some Run DMC. There's some great tracks on there. Huey Lewis's Small World was released then. I do remember I was huge into Huey Lewis. I do remember going out pretty early to get that one on cassette.
Okay.
Living in a Perfect World and then the title track, I think were the only two that were released on there. But I still liked the album, and even though it really didn't sell well and kind of forced them to go back to the 50s, and and do those cover tracks later in the 90s. I got to mention Injustice for All by Metallica. I remember vividly, me and a friend of mine, we'd be playing the Sega Genesis, particularly like Madden, I guess it would be like, I'm dating myself, 92 or 93. We would throw on Injustice for All, and particularly the track One. Oh my gosh. Such a great track, and we would just let that thing play while we're, you know, trying to run the there's this play on Madden where you could kick the ball to the corner of the end zone and choose the guy that was all the way to the sideline and speed run him down the field, and if you timed your dive tackle perfectly, it would bring out the stretcher, and we would just go crazy. That was like the ultimate thing in that game, because you know, anyway. But you would hit the guy, and you know, it just as you hear, you know, Lars doing those bass drums, and anyway, that was one. Oh my gosh, I'm going to mention this just because it hurts me, but I would say I was a fan. Milli Vanilli, All or Nothing.
That's okay. I mean,
I remember requesting songs at a roller skating birthday party.
Blame It on the Rain? Is that the one?
Well, the one that I requested, I think,
Girl, You Know It's True.
Yeah.
Okay.
Girl, You Know It's True.
I know it's 30 years later and everything like that. I look at it now as an adult and I say, was it really that big of a deal? Like that those two guys weren't singing? Because didn't we get that with a CNC Music Factory later? Remember? Yeah, and then it's happened a few times, and as the years have progressed, we've cared less about it, but it ultimately destroyed a decent pop, you know, group. I mean, didn't they also win? They also won Best New Artist, did they not?
Yeah. That was, I believe that was
give it back.
That was 88, right? And they gave it back.
Yeah. So, like, I you know, maybe we should deep dive one day into the culture of Milli Vanilli, because I remember when it was like discovered that they weren't really singing. Even as a young kid, I was like, so who cares? I don't really care. I mean, it's good music. Yeah. These guys are dancing. They're performing for me. Who cares?
Right.
That's my defense of Milli Vanilli.
Well, I guess I was kind of the same way, because I never really cared, because I loved the music as at that time, and you know, whether they were singing it or not, I wouldn't change my opinion of how I felt about the songs that I really liked, you know. Right. So I don't know.
Right.
Anyway, whatever. I'm going to end with just a quick note that, again, this was during the Columbia House and BMG era for me, and I went and picked actually 3 greatest hits albums that were released that year for Fleetwood Mac, Journey, and REO Speedwagon, and I didn't want to really include them in the list. I don't know, because I'm a little greatest hits are right. Yeah. It's kind of cheating.
Yeah,
because you're not listening to those songs really during that time, and really none of them will re-chart or re-release. Right. Very rare. But I did want to mention those, because those really introduced me to each of those 3 and their whole catalog really of music up to that time.
Okay.
So like Fleetwood Mac, that was, you know, my first introduction to go back and listen to Rumors, and then Journey, you know, oh my gosh. I knew Journey. I remember the videos, you know, and that really expanded that and gave me a lot more songs that I really enjoy now. And the same with REO. So those 3 were released that year. I just wanted to throw those out there. That, yeah, man,
I would have hung up on you if you used any of those 3. I would have hung up on you. But we're done. We're done here. Yeah, I'm out. Yeah.
So that's it. That's going to be it for me. I had a few more in there, but we'll just let them. We'll just let them be, and we'll let you get on. But I really appreciate you coming on. Just tell us again a little bit about the Chap Report, and what you got going on over there at Nerds Lunch.
Sure. So the Chap Report. So you had mentioned earlier that we did the Underscoop Fire website years ago. We had an accompanying kind of pop culture, sometimes 80s themed podcast that we did for 150 episodes. And then when that kind of died out and we ended that series, I started my own kind of one-on-one show called the Chap Report. And I did that for a little bit. Then I took a hiatus, and I've been a big fan of the Nerd Lunch podcast and their particular show and their spinoff show. And I got together with CT, who kind of produces, and I said, I'm looking to get back into the podcast game, but really on a limited basis. And he said, I've got one slot for you every month. And I said, oh, I could handle that. So every fourth episode on their feed, every fourth Tuesday, a new show comes out that I host. So far, we did a box office preview for the summer with Tank. I did a show last month with Chad from Horror Movie Barbecue. And this month, this episode, which will be coming out in June, is actually a solo show that I did. Those are dangerous to do when you don't have because you can ramble and then there's no one to cut you off and go, can we talk about something else now? Right. But I had a good time doing that. I have some guests lined up for future shows. So if you're a fan of pop culture or anything like that, look for the Chap Report in the Nerd Lunch feed, wherever you get your podcasts.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, yes. Go out there and subscribe. I have listened to all of them up to this point, and I did listen to the show before you made the jump over to Nerd Lunch. So and we have a lot of the same people in common. Chad was actually on. We were counting down 1988 movies not too long ago. Awesome. So yeah, we have some of the same shared universe, I'll say.
Awesome.
But you can also find Corey over there on the Twitters, the Chap Report, and at Chapman Runner.
That's right.
If you want to connect.
Yeah. If you want to connect or you want to disagree with me, that's fine too. Or tell me you love this particular podcast. I always want to hear the good and the bad. So send me your comments, your questions, and we'll go from there.
Awesome. All right. Well, we will wrap on this Rankum show. Thanks again, Corey, for your musical opinions. And we will catch you next time with another countdown.
Thanks, Jason.